I'm Nima Rajan. Mining company Vale reports all 39 miners who had been trapped underground since Sunday in a northern Ontario mine are back above ground. Vale reported just after 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time that the rescue operation had been completed. Workers became trapped in the mine on Sunday, some 1.2 kilometers down. This is when a scoop bucket being sent underground detached and blocked the mine shaft. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Parliament will sit by the end of this fall. He told reporters in Ottawa that he has informed Governor-General Mary Simon that he intends to form government. Chrystia Freeland will remain as Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Trudeau says his government is launching a five-pronged pandemic-related campaign, which includes vaccine mandates for federal workers, airplane and train passengers, setting up an internationally recognized vaccine passport for travelers, and protecting healthcare workers from harassment. A new report suggests Canada's labour shortage is not going anywhere anytime soon. The report from the Business Development Bank of Canada says 64% of Canadian businesses claim labour shortages are limiting their growth. But it notes the pandemic didn't create the labour shortage, it only made an existing situation worse. Canada's aging population means more workers are retiring and there are fewer young workers to take their places. The BDC report says employers who want to attract and retain workers should look at offering perks. The president of the National Airlines Council of Canada is still waiting on the details of Ottawa's new rule requiring most commercial travelers to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement yesterday. The vaccine mandate would cover the federal civil service and travelers in federally regulated industries. This includes airlines, trains, and cruise ships, as well as workers in those fields. The Liberals have asked for a recount in a close-run riding in Quebec after a possible problem with a ballot box. The Châteauguay-Lacolle riding saw the Bloc Québécois candidate defeat his Liberal rival by 286 votes. A recount is also likely to happen in the Toronto riding of Davenport, where the Liberals beat the NDP by 76 votes. Parties can go to court to request a recount within 4 days of votes being checked and validated. The Conservative incumbent, who was defeated in Calgary Skyview in last week's federal election, is planning to ask a court to quash the result. That's after Liberal George Chahal was captured on camera on the eve of the election, removing a campaign pamphlet left by his Conservative opponent, Jag Sahota. He replaced it with one of his own. Both sides say the other brochures contained inaccurate information about where to vote. COVID-19 restrictions are taking effect early in some parts of BC. Dr. Bonnie Henry's order concerns gatherings and covers the eastern Fraser Valley. This includes Abbotsford, Mission, Chilliwack, and Hope. Anyone in that area wanting to go to a gym, movie, or a sporting event must now show proof of 2 doses of vaccine, a rule that is set to kick in for the rest of BC on October 24th. She says the dramatic rise in COVID cases among children in BC reflects lower vaccination rates in some communities. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says hospitals in the province will soon be protected by the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act that was passed last year. Healthcare facilities will soon be subject to the same legal protection as railways, highways, and pipelines, carrying punishments for trespassing, interfering with operations and construction, or causing damage. Mr. Kenney did not announce new lockdown restrictions to curb Alberta's surging COVID-19 infections. An Ontario Science Advisory Group says while public health measures and vaccinations have flattened the fourth wave of COVID-19 in the province, the situation remains fragile and unpredictable. In a report released yesterday, the group notes that case numbers, hospitalizations, and intensive care admissions are currently not increasing in the province. This as vaccination coverage grows. But the group says trends vary across the province. Quebec is offering a 3rd dose of COVID-19 vaccine to residents of long-term care facilities and seniors' residences. Health Minister Christian Dubé says the 3rd dose will be offered to residents at the end of October and will be given at the same time as seasonal vaccinations. Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have made 3rd doses available to people in congregate care settings. Manitoba is offering 3rd doses to residents of long-term care facilities in First Nations communities. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs says it's becoming clear that between 10 and 15% of Canada's population will not agree to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. Premier Higgs says there hasn't been general agreement on the proportion of the population that will remain unvaccinated. He added that whatever the number is, that segment of the population will present an ongoing challenge to the country's efforts to contain the virus. All right, when we come back from break, we will hear from Brendan Caldwell of Caldwell Securities Limited in our weekly business and finance segment. That and, of course, more news from around the world only on the Forum Daily. We'll see you shortly after a short break. All right, welcome back. It's time for our weekly business and finance segment with Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily. Always great having you on the show.
Glad to be back. Thank you, Nima.
Now, you recently returned from the UK, and I bet you have a lot of stories to tell. But your VP of Marketing, Elizabeth Nimovsky, mentioned a story about the monument in Helston, Cornwall. So can you tell us a little bit about it and what happened there?
I would love to hear from anybody watching if they've ever been to Helston, Cornwall. I was only there to mail our COVID test. It's what they do in England before you get on a plane. You literally mail in a self-done COVID test. And I was wandering around the streets and found this monument to a man who'd passed away in 1834, Humphrey Millet Grills, Grylls. Nobody's heard of him. I certainly hadn't. But he had used his influence working with the banks and others to keep the tin mine in that region of Cornwall open, saving 1,200 jobs. He was, by what was inscribed in the monument and the plaque next to it, a businessman. And there's very few plaques and monuments erected to businessmen for what they actually are business people, for what they actually do in business. But it was just interesting to hear this man's story 190 years later almost, about how business was used to actually transform a community. And the monument was put up by a subscription. That is, people put in a shilling, a penny, a pound to build this thing because of what this fellow did in a business context. While I don't expect many monuments to be built to businessmen in the future, probably fewer than been in the past, it is interesting to see how business can actually affect people's lives in a positive way.
Very interesting indeed, Brendan. Now, I want to jump to the topic of capital markets. That's our topic of discussion today. So let's simplify it for our viewers, Brendan. What are capital markets and how do they work?
Well, there are a couple of different capital markets. There's the debt market where bonds are bought and sold. And there's the one that is a little more transparent to people, which is the stock market, where bits of companies, shares are bought and sold, as well as other types of securities that provide you an equity, provide you an ownership participation. So there's the debt market, bond markets, and the ownership market or the stock market. And between the two of these, it allows for both the raising of capital, to raising of money to fund ideas, companies, businesses, and allows the economy to move forward. So capital markets is an interesting and very, in a way, democratic process because it allows investors to have the free expression of capital, allows them to put their money into the best ideas in a country or in a society.
And what would you say are the top benefits of investing in a capital market for the individual investor?
You have a piece of the action. You own a piece of whatever is good, whatever you're interested in, whatever products you buy, because it's all very well to support, say, Apple by buying Apple products. But if you'd like your Apple computer, your iPhone, your iPad, one should own a share of Apple. In fact, some investment experts say that if you're going to buy a product, you should put at least as much money into a share of the company whose product that you're buying. In a way, if you like a product, you'll find that in time that the investment that you made will pay or more than pay for the product that you ended up buying. So it allows you to have a piece of the action, to participate in the ideas and products that you think are valuable.
So how can the average Canadian get into the world of capital markets, Brendan? What are the first steps they can take?
Well, again, it's a way of participating in what your economy is doing. And the way that most people do that is through the stock market, either directly by talking to an investment advisor or I suppose using a discount brokerage firm. One can buy a share, a piece of a company, Apple or some other company. Or if one wants to not just buy one company, but a broad array of them, one can buy a fund, a mutual fund, an exchange-traded fund. These are vehicles that allow you to participate in lots of different companies and often provide the benefit of professional management. So one can either do it on one's own through a discount firm, or, and obviously I'm a biased witness here, talk to an investment advisor professional to help you put your ideas, things that you really like to want to have a piece of, into action by owning a piece of a stock or a fund that invests in the kind of things that are interesting to you.
All right, Brendan, just about 30 seconds left, but taking a look at the bigger picture here, I want to go back to you mentioning that monument in Helston, Cornwall, honoring what the world of business does for the community. How does the financial industry help Canadians and the economy and overall the world? Just about 25 seconds left here.
One must not think of the world and as a fixed thing, the economy as a fixed amount of wealth that needs to be redistributed. Wealth is always being created. So capital markets help in that creation of wealth. They also help for a much broader distribution of wealth, because if everything is privately owned, then only a handful of people own all the money. It's the old mercantile aristocratic system of years ago.
All right, up next, we turn to Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thank you, Nima, and hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we have certainly seen another volatile start to the markets this week. They were down by about 2% in the United States yesterday, down by 1.4% on the TSX yesterday as well, really on inflation concerns that are heating up. The debate as to whether or not inflation is transitory is leaning towards a little bit more inflation in for longer, with the U.S. 10-year yield jumping to 1.5% yesterday. That caused a sell-off in bonds as well as a sell-off in the equity markets. Today, however, we are seeing a nice rebound, so it's recouping some of those losses. But the NASDAQ did, in fact, have its worst day since March of this year. So a little bit of a concern on the inflation front for sure. Away from that, as it relates to the inflation debate, the question, in my opinion, really comes down to what's your definition of transitory? Recall when we hear from U.S. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, I think the thinking a couple of months ago was that transitory meant 3 to 5 months. Well, I think that the consensus view now on Wall Street and Bay Street is that, maybe it's 3 years. And what kind of impact will that have on the rate environment, the interest rate environment, the yield environment, therefore the valuations on the equity markets? And also, so importantly, what are corporations facing these days? And on that front, we have had a number of high-profile companies cite inflation headwinds, such as Micron, PPG, Sherwin-Williams, GE, 3M, FedEx, Nike, Costco, all of those companies, and in some cases, those companies lowering their guidance for earnings expectations because of those increased costs. So something to very much be aware of. At the same time, the bulls on the street would say that we do still have easy monetary policy. The reopening trade will spur demand. You've got an increase in buybacks, increase in inventory builds. All of that obviously very positive for the equity markets and the economic outlook. B of A, for one, talking a lot about the pent-up demand. And also, of course, getting notice is the view that we will see a peak in the Delta variant. So all of that is bullish for equity markets. Perhaps that's also why we're seeing a bit of a rebound today. Away from that, though, the other market drivers to be considered, you've got the U.S. debt ceiling debate, the fact that we don't want a government shutdown in the United States. You also have no clear path in the United States for fiscal stimulus, a slowdown in China's economy, and of course, those Evergrande headlines, the largest perhaps property developer out of China. But that appears to be contained. Away from that, as it relates to the bullish case in the markets, there's really no alternative. As I mentioned, you've got that nice inventory build. And the S&P 500 earnings outlook for the third quarter looks to be up by about 23%. So all pretty strong there. In terms of stock headlines to be aware of this week, interesting as it relates to B of A, they got an upgrade over at Bernstein. That stock up nicely. Eli Lilly was upgraded over at Citi, citing positive results from their Alzheimer's therapy results. In Canada, a couple of key comments here. The inflation debate continues here as well. You've got Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, their chief economist, saying that they believe the BOC will let inflation run hotter, whereas most economists expect the BOC to raise rates in 2022. On the housing front, you have the CMHC in their housing report saying that the Canadian real estate market is overheated and is at risk of a downturn. In terms of stock news, we have a merger of equals between Agnico Eagle and Kirkland. We also, on the Canadian stock front, have AGF, the money management company, coming in better than expected on their earnings front. You've got Tech Resources receiving an upgrade over at Citi and increasing their price target to $40. And on the political economic front, Trudeau is suggesting that Chrysler Freeland will be the Deputy PM and Finance Minister. In terms of the loonie, it was a little bit weaker versus that US dollar. That would be a normal course of action if you've got a US dollar that's moving higher on the back of a higher yield curve in the United States. And also we've got WTI on track for 6 weeks of straight gains. And lastly here, when we think about the cryptocurrency world, we've actually seen quite a bit of a pullback in crypto. It is up nicely today at about 42,000. I'll leave it there. Next thing to watch, though, is Canadian GDP out this week. That will be the last GDP read, the read of our economy before the BOC's next rate decision, and what that might mean for our interest rate environment and whether they'll back liquidity here in Canada. That does it for me. Nima, back to you.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Well, after the break, we'll take a look at stories from around the world. The top U.S. general tells Congress that he favored keeping troops in Afghanistan. Japan's set for a new PM, and power cuts continue in China. These stories and more coming up after the break. Stay with us. The top general in the U.S. has called the 20-year war in Afghanistan a strategic failure. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has also told Congress that he favored keeping several thousand troops in the country. This to prevent a collapse of the U.S.-supported Kabul government and a rapid takeover by the Taliban. General Milley refused to say what advice he gave to President Joe Biden. U.S. consumer confidence has declined for the third straight month this September. The Conference Board reports that its consumer confidence index fell to a reading of 109.3 in September. This is down from 115.2 in August. The board says consumers' view of both the present situation and future expectations continue to degrade. This as intentions for spending on big items like homes, autos, and major appliances all retreated again. Concerns about inflation are also dampening consumer sentiment. Japan's former foreign minister, Fumio Kishida, has won the governing party leadership election and is set to become the next prime minister. Mr. Kishida replaces outgoing party leader, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, who is stepping down after serving only 1 year. As new leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, Mr. Kishida is certain to be elected as the next prime minister on Monday in Parliament. This is where his party and coalition partner will control the House. Haiti's prime minister says he plans to hold a referendum to modify the country's constitution by February 2022, and he hopes to organize elections early next year. In an interview on Tuesday with the Associated Press, Ariel Henry dismissed opponents who accused him of wanting to stay in power. He said that mistrust is one of the biggest challenges he faces. Mr. Henry said the referendum is a priority because the current constitution is rejected by a majority of political figures and civil society leaders. Britain's government plans to allow researchers to use gene editing techniques to develop crops. Gene editing could help scientists to quickly breed crops that are more nutritious or resistant to pests and diseases. The government announced the plan to make it easier for researchers to conduct studies in the field. Scientists draw a distinction between gene editing, which involves the manipulation of genes with a single species, and genetic modification, which moves DNA from one species into a different one. Cities across China are enforcing power cuts to meet official conservation targets. Factories in China's busiest manufacturing provinces have been ordered to suspend production for up to a week. This is prompting concern that global supplies of smartphones and other goods might be disrupted. Now, urban neighborhoods are being blacked out. News reports blame high coal prices, saying that they make power companies reluctant to meet demand. But officials are also under pressure to curtail energy use in order to meet official targets. North Korea says it successfully tested a new hypersonic missile as it continues to expand its military capabilities. The missile test early Tuesday was North Korea's third round of launches this month. It took place as the North tries to pressure Washington and Seoul over long-stalled negotiations over its nuclear weapons. North Korea's state media implied the missile met certain technical requirements, suggesting it was being developed as nuclear capable. The United Nations humanitarian chief calls the crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region a stain on our conscience. The Tigray region is under what the UN calls a de facto government blockade of food, medical supplies, and fuel. In an interview with the Associated Press, Martin Griffiths said memories of Ethiopia's 1980s famine, whose images shocked the world, are vivid in his mind, and he hopes it is not happening at present. Ukraine on Wednesday marked the 80th anniversary of the Babi Yar massacre during World War II. Babi Yar, a ravine in the Ukraine capital, Kiev, is where nearly 34,000 Jews were killed within 48 hours in 1941, when the city was under Nazi occupation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky laid out flowers at the monument to the victims of the massacre. Well, starting Wednesday, YouTube will block all anti-vaccine content. The video-sharing tech platform announced it will block and remove false claims that vaccines are dangerous and cause health issues like autism, cancer, or infertility. The tech company also deleted accounts belonging to notable individuals who propagated vaccine misinformation and conspiracy theories. The ban on vaccine misinformation extends to all approved immunizations as countries struggle to ramp up vaccination rates during the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, a little bit of kindness can go a long way, even in the classroom. This includes the university classroom. Dr. John Tyler Binfet and Dr. Sally Stewart at UBC recently published a study into how including a kindness assignment in an undergraduate course impacted students. Dr. Binfet says being kind brings a number of benefits like stress reduction, happiness, and peer acceptance. The study was published in the Journal of Further and Higher Education. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. This was Forum Daily, and we'll see you next time.